chant you hear, Captain Crozier. Well, hundreds of sailors from the USS Theodore Roosevelt, they were cheering that for their former commander, Captain Brett Crozier, after he was fired late last week. The captain removed after he sent a letter asking for help because his ship was ravaged by a coronavirus. More than 100 sailors on his ship, in fact, have tested positive, and he wanted to come into port to quarantine his crew. By the way, the captain also is under lockdown as he too has tested positive. Now I'm going to read a portion of the captain's letter. Quote, removing the majority of personnel from a deployed U.S. naval nuclear aircraft carrier and isolating them for 2 weeks may seem like an extraordinary measure, but this is a necessary risk. Keeping over 4,100 young men and women on board the TR is an unnecessary risk and breaks faith with those sailors entrusted to our care. Also today, the man who fired him is now taking pot shots at the ousted Captain Crozier. Take a listen to the acting Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Modly, and I want to remind you, he fired Captain Crozier in part because he gave a statement that became public. So this again, the acting Secretary, Mr. Modly here, a speech that he gave to the crew of the Teddy Roosevelt today. The audio got out there, obtained by several news outlets.
If he didn't think, it was my opinion, that if he didn't think that information was going to get out into the public in this information age that we live in, then he was A, too naive or too stupid to be the commanding officer of a ship like this. It was a betrayal of trust with me, with his chain of command, with you, with the 800 to 1,000 people who are your shipmates on shore right now, busting their asses every day to do what they need to do, to convert what they do in a normal day, to get you guys off of here, get you safe, get you healthy, get you clean.
Remember the word betrayal. It's about as harsh condemnation as you can do from a military officer. Well, over the weekend, both the Defense Secretary and President Trump defended the decision to fire the captain.
With regard to the relief of Captain Crozier, I think Acting Secretary Modly made a very tough decision, a decision that I support. It was based on his view that he had lost faith and confidence in the captain based on his actions. It was supported by Navy leadership. And I think it's just another example how we hold leaders accountable for their actions.
Speaking of accountability, the Commander-in-Chief passed the buck, but he also defended the decision to fire the captain.
They made their decision. I didn't make the decision. Secretary of Defense was involved, and a lot of people were involved. I thought it was terrible what he did. To write a letter? I mean, this isn't a class on literature. This is a captain of a massive ship that's nuclear-powered. And he shouldn't be talking that way in a letter. He could call and ask and suggest.
The President is supporting the firing of Captain Crozier, a man who was trying to protect his men by every account, even his critics. But Trump intervened, if I can remind you, to help Chief Petty Officer Eddie Gallagher, and then he later pardoned him. The Navy SEAL was accused of war crimes, including stabbing to death an Iraqi captive, but he was only convicted of posing with a body. And I remind you, his own men, fellow SEALs, battle-hardened, turned Gallagher in and testified against him. They called him, quote, a psychopath, and again, quote, the worst of the worst. That is the man that Trump chose to help and go around naval discipline. I want to bring in our next guest, Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill. She's a Democrat from New Jersey. She is also a former Navy pilot who served on the USS Theodore Roosevelt. But when we're talking about COVID-19, this is not a theoretical challenge or one that's just impacting, obviously, this country and your constituents. It's impacting your household as well. We understand your husband has tested positive. How is he and your family doing?
Well, thanks so much for asking. He is doing well. He's had it probably for about 2 weeks. At first, we thought it was the flu because he didn't have a cough or a fever. And unfortunately, we didn't quarantine him. So I think, some of us in the family have shown some mild symptoms. I'm hoping that we can get by with just that. And yet it's, as you know, very scary because, of course, we have friends that are on ventilators right now. And you just hope that you are the group that has the mild symptoms.
Well, we obviously hope it goes well for your husband and family. I want you to put on your former hat, and I guess you never closed the door on your Navy career, but as Navy Aviator, I'm really curious, and we gave everybody the latest as it relates with Commander Crozier, but not only how he was treated, but now we learned that the acting Navy Secretary went before his sailors and called him stupid and naive. First off, the fact that he was canned, and I will point out, I think it's very interesting, the president, the lengths he went to with Mr. Gallagher, who was accused of war crimes, but we're condemning Crozier for looking out for his men and women that were under his supervision. And then the secretary had come out today and call him stupid and naive, and basically saying he was looking for publicity. I don't know what they're doing when it comes from the administration, but particularly with this, but your perspective a lot closer than mine.
Well, I guess I read it a lot differently than some cry for publicity. I served on the Theodore Roosevelt as a midshipman, and I graduated from the Naval Academy about the same time as Captain Crozier, and we have a lot of mutual friends. And I can tell you that he is very highly thought of in the Navy, and you don't become the captain of an aircraft carrier without having just a very successful and impressive career as he did. So to have the Secretary of the Navy demean him in that way in front of that crew was really offensive to me personally. And I also have many questions about what led to the SecNav letting him go. So I, along with some other members of the House Armed Services Committee, will be calling for an investigation into that.
To that end, Congressman, we saw the Inspector General that was involved, obviously, with the Ukraine scandal. He's summarily fired as well. And I know they work at the pleasure of the president, but what is the messaging that, whether it relates to Captain Crozier or anything else, that there's a price to be paid if, you speak out for what you think is right, particularly if it's viewed, at least in this White House, as not politically expedient?
I find this very interesting because as I was running for Congress, I often told a story about things that I'd learned in naval leadership at the Naval Academy. And we would do these case studies of ships running aground. And when the ship would run aground, there were people on the bridge of the ship that knew it was about to run aground, and they didn't say anything because they were afraid to speak up. They were afraid to tell the captain that what he or she was doing was wrong and that they were about to run aground. You need, if you are a good leader, you need people to be able to come to you and say, you're handling this wrong, or I just want to point out to you that this is the danger of how you're looking at this, or I don't think you're looking at the whole picture. And you can say to those people, I disagree. I know what I'm doing. And many times when I was in the military, people would express doubt on different things. And I'd say, thank you for your input. And we have to go forward in this way for various reasons. But you need people to be able to flag those concerns for you. You need to be able, as a good leader, to hear other points of view, to ensure that you are making the right decisions. The last thing you need, and the last thing I ever encourage on my team, is just a bunch of yes men and yes women who, whatever you say, they simply agree with. You need to be able to hear alternative points of view so that you can make sure that you're making the right decision.
Well, to that point, Congresswoman, it's also, you want the most quality people who are most informed on any given subject to be the voices that, we the people can trust, but moreover here, that science and fact and experience are more important than political expediency. And there was a couple things in the last few days, and I've been echoing to my audience, now is not the time for politics, but Jared Kushner got on the stage last week and he lectured governors like Murphy and others here who are knee-deep in trying to make sure their state can provide the best care that they can for their constituents, that the ventilators that were in the national stockpile were his or theirs, and that the governors look to them and that they maybe exaggerate or inflating their real need, as if there was 50 different problems instead of a United States. Moreover, we now learned that Peter Navarro, who, he's lecturing Dr. Fauci on what we should or shouldn't do with medicines that haven't been properly even tested right now and what should go out. Fauci's been with 6 administrations. Do you share a concern that the right people or the best equipped people aren't necessarily being the ones that are having the best seat at the table, given the national crisis that we're dealing with?
Well, we have a saying in the military, one team, one fight, and that's what we're in right now. We are all in this together, and what's unfortunately happening on the ground as we're talking about the critical personal protective equipment people need, or ventilators, or even now the sedatives for ventilators, we have different governors negotiating against each other for that. We have hospital systems trying to negotiate against governors because they are negotiating using their traditional supply lines. And then we have FEMA occasionally coming in and taking gear that hospital systems or governors thought were coming to them. All at the same time, this is driving the price up. I have conversations every morning with my hospital systems. We've had them report pricing up to 9 times what it is in normal times.
Well, Congresswoman, I appreciate the time, and again, best of luck to the health for your family here, and obviously the best of luck for all of us. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, when we come back, the government's sluggish initial response to the coronavirus is well documented. Now, there's another chapter being written in real time. The financial rescue package is also getting off to a rocky start, but you wouldn't know it if you listen to our president. We'll explain after the break.